Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
My starting point is by saying we've got to improve the education system in our country and transform the life chances of our children. My starting point as Chief Inspector is that although standards have improved, there's still a huge way to go. I remember when I first started teaching and leading schools in the 60s, 70s and 80s, when a lack of political will, little or no accountability in the system, quite woolly educational ideas and industrial turmoil failed generations of our children and young people. We've come a long way from that time, but we're also a long way from creating a world-class education system for a great many children in our country. And let's remind ourselves of where we are in terms of standards. Around 75,000 primary school pupils are not making the expected progress in English, and a similar number in maths. 1 in 5 boys don't reach the expected level in reading. A third of all pupils leave primary school without being secure in reading, writing and mathematics, rising to more than 40% of the most deprived pupils. Looking at the more demanding level 5, the top end of primary school, progress has completely stalled. And there are no more pupils reaching this level now than there were 5 years ago. In secondary schools, 250,000 children don't achieve the benchmark 5A star to C grades at GCSE, including English and maths. Just 6.5% of those who started secondary school below the benchmark at the end of primary went on to achieve 5A star to C grades, including English and maths. Overall, less than 1 in 7 young people achieve the more demanding standard of the English bac. For far too many children, education is quite simply a lottery. Even in leafy areas, we find more than 300 schools serving the most affluent children that are coasting. Judged satisfactory twice in a row. But it's especially a lottery, one with the worst odds for the poorest children. Far too much depends on the luck of where you live, the region, the city, and the postcode. We need to back the growing cadre of leaders, national leaders of education, federal heads, teaching school heads, and others who challenge the status quo and fight for the rights of children. We need leaders who understand that their pupils have just one chance of a good education and are prepared to stand up to the vested interests that have stood in the way of progress for generations. We need to see major changes in leadership style and changes in attitude in many schools. The children and young people of England who need skills and qualifications in an increasingly competitive employment market can't wait any longer. The 1 million young unemployed have a right to demand that they're better prepared for the world of work. They need change to happen, and they need it now. That's why Ofsted is going to be clear about the standards we expect of schools that aren't good enough. They need to know how to reach a better standard and how much time they've got to do it. Ofsted sees truly outstanding schools serving the most deprived communities, not just a few, but hundreds. Schools where teaching is outstanding, where pupils make great progress despite their circumstances, and as a result achieve outstanding results. If we're to have a world-class education system, we must have high expectations of all our schools. We must challenge the system to do better, and in so doing, support the leaders who are prepared to do the tough things that need to be done to drive up standards. No teacher or head teacher should be tolerant of a culture of mediocrity, which characterizes so much of our system today, dressed up as satisfactory. The term satisfactory falsely denotes acceptable provision. Ask parents what they want, and they'll tell you they want their children to attend good schools. They don't want them to attend schools that are less than good. They know, and as former chief inspectors have pointed out, provision that is not yet good is not acceptable. I want to do away with the current categories of satisfactory and notice to improve, so that if a school is not good, then it is clearly judged as one that requires improvement. We will change our inspection reports. On the first page of each report, we will set out unequivocally and clearly, and in language that parents and others can understand, why schools that require improvement are not yet good, and what they need to do to improve. If a school appears to be on a trajectory of improvement, we will also make that very clear. And thirdly, we will change how quickly the inspection system turns its attention to these schools. At the moment, satisfactory schools could go almost 4 years before the next full inspection. In other words, a child in the primary or secondary phase could spend their whole school career in a school that is less than good. For these schools, I want to reduce the time between inspections significantly, perhaps to no more than 18 months, with a requirement that after 2 inspections, if a school hasn't improved to good, it will go into special measures. Hopefully, this will help head teachers and governors to focus more urgently on the need to take decisive action and to take it quickly.
I agree with Sir Michael wholeheartedly when he says that satisfactory schools need to improve. Our findings showed that disadvantaged pupils disproportionately attend these schools. So actually they're facing double disadvantage there. You know, they come to school disadvantaged, and then the quality of their school means that they're disadvantaged again. Our report also, though, showed the challenges that many of these schools faced. Some of the schools were in very sad circumstances within our subsample of schools stuck at satisfactory. For example, had rapid recent turnover of head teachers, were finding it challenging to recruit key staff in the SLT or in particular subject areas, and often faced falling roles as well. So we potentially have, you know, a really challenging situation around sort of cycles of descent, disadvantage, and so on. It's clearly not acceptable that schools are left to stagnate, as has happened, as Sir Michael has explained. This is, I would argue, a social justice issue. Mel Ainscough and his colleagues have shown that disadvantaged children face 3 times the effect from their school that their middle-class counterparts do in terms of the outcomes that they gain from school. So we can't simply leave the situation as it is. This, of course, comprises an element in the general explanation for the preposterous lack of social mobility we see in this country. And accountability is clearly an important ingredient in securing improvement. But our recommendations were clear that, as I've said, many of those schools face really challenging circumstances, and we say they need to be supported to improve. It's not enough just to castigate them. And indeed, my report also recognised that some of the practices in these schools were actually good or better, but they often lacked capacity across the board. And as we've heard from Sir Michael, often this was in relation to teaching quality fundamentally. Teaching quality and assessment practices particularly tended to be patchy in these schools. That was a real feature of the satisfactory schools in our subsample. And it was that observation that underpinned our recommendation to rename satisfactory schools performs inconsistently. We felt that that title recognised that satisfactory schools tend to contain some elements of good practice, but also simultaneously to better indicate to stakeholders that other areas need improvement. It is imperative that these schools are supported as well as challenged. I fear that too draconian approach risks switching off head teachers and teachers and potentially runs against the government's stated commitment to professionalism as well. I worry that we might condemn a swathe of schools as semi-failing and that we have no strategy to support them to improve. Now, my report contained a range of recommendations, the majority suggesting, firstly, ways to incentivise the best teachers to work at satisfactory schools, secondly, to provide external support for those schools, thirdly, to develop professional communities and best practice within those schools, in addition to strong accountability measures. And I think that the research evidence really shows that that holistic approach is needed to drive up standards. We have to recognise that while we can attempt to incentivise the best teachers to work in poorer quality schools, many of those schools are located in relatively unattractive areas. And the teaching workforce isn't, of course, highly mobile. So I feel strongly that we have to develop existing capacity and inspire teachers to development and reform. My main point is that satisfactory schools need to improve, but that they need to be helped to do so.
So, Michael, your appointment coincides with a new framework, if you like, new rules for your inspectors, which are going to make it harder for schools to be classified as good, outstanding, whatever. How much harder would you estimate the new framework is? Because some head teachers anecdotally say they think the bar has been raised by one whole grade, and therefore a school that might previously have hoped to be outstanding may now be good, a previously good school may now be satisfactory, or your new term.
In some ways harder, in some ways not. I mean, the most important function for any head teacher is to monitor the quality of teaching in the school. That's how I saw my role as a head over 25 years. My job was to make sure I knew what was happening in the classroom. I was out of my office all the time, or most of the time. I knew in the school where the weaknesses were. I made sure that good teachers were rewarded, and those people who weren't teaching well were supported until it reached the point where something had to be done about that. And that's what a good head has to do. And it seems to me that the new framework is about focusing on that and about emphasizing that to school leaders, that that's their job. If we improve the quality of teaching, and if we get the message across that that is the central core purpose of leadership, to monitor the quality of provision, support good teaching, make sure professional development in the school is good, standards will rise. So I see the new framework actually making the life of good heads easier, not more difficult.
Professor Francis, your report recommended, as you said, the term performing inconsistently instead of calling schools satisfactory. How materially different is that from Sir Michael's proposal of requires improvement?
In some ways, the notion of satisfactory or adequate is a really kind of gloomy designation in any case. It suggests a sort of stolidness that's slightly depressing. I think the notion of performing inconsistently, for us, better captured the fact that actually these schools could incorporate really good practice, but that wasn't rolled out consistently across the school. It wasn't represented across departments and so on, or indeed the level of the individual teacher. So I think that's how we'd seen our title capturing that situation, almost being better reflective of the reality for the school. But I recognise that there were constraints with that title as well.
Yeah. I think requirement to improve, we thought long and hard about this, and we debated this for some time when I joined Ofsted. But that requirement word, I think, is an important one. I mean, the lessons learned from schools going into a category, I'm not saying requirement to improve is a category, but the lessons of schools going into a notice to improve and a special measures category is that a lot of attention was given to those schools, a lot of support was provided, and there's plentiful evidence of schools moving out of those categories pretty quickly. And what this will do is, first of all, identify a school that needs to be supported more intensively. It's sending a signal to the head and to the governors that they need to take more urgent action. Some might already be doing so, of course, and the first page of the inspection report will particularly identify those schools that are in a required to improve category, but is making progress, and that progress might be quite steep. We need to really say that in the first page of the report. But it does send the message that something has to be done by the time inspectors come in between 12 and 18 months.
There are schools that may have weaknesses that are being addressed, and isn't the same problem lying within your proposal that a local newspaper, for example, will pick up the headline requiring improvement, and even if, as you say, you make clear on the first page tremendous improvement is going on, that label may stick, and the danger then is that if I were a parent in that circumstance, I certainly would reconsider putting in an application for my child to be admitted to that school. I may consider withdrawing my child, and then you've actually shaken up what was a trajectory to improve by the danger is you might have falling rolls, falling revenues, and put the school into more difficulty than it was before.
Well, hopefully parents read reports. Hopefully newspapers report the situation properly and make it clear that a particular school is improving its performance. And most parents know what's happening in a school. They're not stupid. They know what the bus stop talk is. They know that a school is improving. They don't need Ofsted to tell them that. The word on the street is that this is an improving school. But it's not yet good, and we need to be clear about that. And I don't think we should patronise parents by calling it something which is satisfactory. It's sort of damning with faint praise.
Given the policies around school choice and so on, it's almost naturally what one might expect from a marketised space, that if parents have choice, they choose not to send their child to a school that's been designated problematic in some way. We know that parents have different levels of choice depending on their socioeconomic background, because of course not only do they have different levels of access to information, but also different financial possibilities really. Working class parents can't afford to move their house or whatever to the catchment of an outstanding school necessarily. So choice works in different ways for different families, and I'd be very worried that we might precipitate these spirals of decline for struggling schools. This is why I'm so concerned that we build in support as well as challenge.